Hello, and welcome to this installment of our nonprofit podcast series sponsored by the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. My name is Jason Q. I'm a staff attorney at the DC Bar Pro Bono Center, and I'm joined today by Lauren Paley, who's a program specialist here at the center. Hi, Lauren.
Hi.
Okay, awesome. So Lauren and I spend a lot of our time helping nonprofits secure training, resources, and legal representation. It's a big part of what we do at the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. We tend to work with established nonprofits, and we help them with ongoing compliance matters, everything from board governance to protecting their intellectual property to risk management. But we wanted to do something a little bit different today and to talk about nonprofits that are still early in the startup phase, or maybe you're a prospective nonprofit founder who has a great idea for an organization, and you want to think about what your next steps are going to be. Does that sound right?
That sounds right, yeah. I've been here for a number of years now, so I've had a chance to speak to hundreds of startup nonprofits, and they often call and they say, I have an idea for a nonprofit, I need a lawyer. And then we talk a little bit further, and what comes out of it is that they need to do a little bit more work actually before they're ready to file some legal paperwork and before even an attorney would be ready to talk with them. So what I do often day to day is have those conversations with nonprofits and point them to resources that can help them get ready so that once they've made all their business decisions, they really are in a good position to then seek out some legal help. So when Jason mentioned creating this podcast, it just seemed like it made a lot of sense since it's a conversation we have often, and we're happy to share it to the broader audience right now.
Yeah, and I think it's a conversation that a lot of us in sort of the legal sector who are working with nonprofits are having a lot. It's sort of what's the best way to help people who are really early in the startup stage of what they're trying to do. And just to sort of set the scene, I think a lot of people today, especially millennials entering the workforce, I think there's a real drive to create social change and to do work that aligns with your values. And at the same time, we live in a society where we really value entrepreneurialism and startup culture. And I think what we're seeing out of that is an ever increasing interest in starting a nonprofit. People think that that's a really good vehicle for them to do the work that they're passionate about doing. And there's definitely a lot of benefits to starting a nonprofit. And in this context, we're talking about creating a 501c3 tax-exempt organization. And some of the benefits of doing that are that you become eligible for a lot of government grants, for grants from private foundations, for certain government contracts. And you also become eligible to receive charitable donations from individuals, and for those donations to be tax deductible for the donors. So that's a really big benefit of creating a 501c3. And there's also something valuable about having that 501c3 brand. I think donors and the public at large, they understand that there's a certain level of transparency and accountability that's required from 501c3 entities. And they like knowing that you've gone through the formal IRS registration process. So that's kind of what we're talking about today is, there's a lot of benefits to forming a 501c3, but we want to make sure that folks are asking the right questions and kind of making the right strategic analysis for when they start an organization from scratch. And I think the first issue we want to talk about is making sure that folks are doing a needs analysis and also a survey of the existing nonprofit landscape.
Yeah, and for a lot of people who are looking to start a nonprofit, I think the needs assessment is a little bit easier for them. Either they're already working in a field that they know, maybe they work with youth, maybe they work in the environmental sciences, and they know some of what the needs are just from their personal experience. But it's still important to sort of, make sure that you actually are fulfilling a need that is out there. So you want to do sort of an environmental scan and get a sense of some of the issues that are important to the area where you're working, and we hope it's Washington, D.C., and to make sure that you're collecting, information beyond your own word. Make sure that you're either looking up government statistics or other statistics that are readily available out there that you can use to kind of support the reasoning for why you want to create your nonprofit.
Right.
So I worry a little bit less about the needs assessment, though it is critical and you should do it.
Yeah, because people who start nonprofits tend to come from a place of familiarity with the issues and they're passionate about the issues. So yeah, they do tend to have a better grasp of what the need is or what they're trying to accomplish. But you're right, that sort of environmental assessment about what other nonprofits are doing, that might be more of a
Yeah,
challenge.
that's the one that I think is actually a little bit more critical because it's, you're not talking about what your firsthand experience is really. What you really need to do is go online, basically. I mean, it could start with as easy as doing a Google search and looking up, the type of work you're looking to do. Maybe you want to mentor girls, so Google, mentorship for girls in DC and see what else is out there. And in doing this, you're going to accomplish a few things. One is that you might find out that there's some groups that are doing similar work to what you've envisioned, and that what you thought was a new idea is actually not unique. In that case, then learn more about what those groups are doing and see if maybe there are things that they can't do that that you can. What is the gap that you want to fill? And separate from that, in reaching out to different groups and learning about what they do, I mean, you might end up finding out that you are going to have some new partners, in talking to these nonprofits. Maybe you want to collaborate with them. Maybe they can refer clients to you. Maybe you can share other kinds of resources. So as you're getting started, there are two places that I point a lot of nonprofits to. And one is guidestar.org. And it's a website that you should get familiar with anyway if you're going to become a 501c3, because basically it's a database of 501c3 nonprofit organizations, and they have profiles for each nonprofit and includes things like your Form 990, which is the informational return that you submit to the IRS each year. So it provides a little bit more information through that 990, and then also some other profile elements that they have on the website that talks about, the program of that organization, talks about the funding of that organization. And for you as a startup, it's a great way to just go to the website, search based on geographical area, and then sort of filter down based on what the organization does to kind of get a sense of other groups like your potential nonprofit that are out there. So just overall, GuideStar is a great place for you to know, because later on it's going to affect you if you become a 501c3. And I mean, honestly, it's a website that a lot of donors use, that a lot of, folks who are trying to really understand what a nonprofit does separate from what they say they do. So it's a great place to look at. And then the second place I recommend is Catalog for Philanthropy. They're based here in the DC area, and they have many nonprofit management experts who basically, evaluate different nonprofits in town, and they sort of give their stamp of approval on the ones that they think do the best job. So where better to look than a place that's sort of already rated the highest and most successful nonprofits in town to kind of see what the standard is. And certainly, they have a broad spectrum of different subject areas. So you can take a peek at whatever subject area you think you're going to do and sort of see what's out there and what's sort of made people impressed now, and sort of get a sense of what you would have to do to meet that same kind of standard as well. And, you could do broader searches, like I said, do Google, but something that I want to stress is don't just look them up online. Pick up the phone, give them a phone call, ask if you can meet with them in person. Having that contact is really going to be even more important than what you can read online. And online's great to get you, to start to think about these other groups and what they do, but really talking to people who are already running the program or who've been through the program, that's when you're going to get your best information.
Yeah, because one goal here, I think, is to avoid duplicating the work that people are already doing, and it's also to avoid competing directly against existing organizations, because in the nonprofit world, there's a very limited pool of donors, of grants. You're also going to be competing for program partners. You're going to be competing for qualified staff and for board members. So, just in terms of resource efficiency and capturing economies of scale, it's never a good idea to be competing against existing organizations, and you won't know who those organizations are unless you do a fair amount of legwork on the front end. And I think another benefit of talking to existing organizations is that you can find out how to, instead of competing with them, how to complement the work that's already being done on the ground. So you can talk to organizations, they work in mentoring girls, but maybe they can help you understand that there's a specific population that's underserved, or maybe there's a specific service model, mentorship in a certain field, in this example, that's not being addressed. And so they can help you, and you can also help yourself understand where these gaps are and where you can add the most value if you do start your own organization.
Definitely. And don't get discouraged if there are other groups that seem to be doing things similar to you. I've talked to many, individuals who thought they wanted to start a nonprofit, and then they found out about another group that was doing basically the same idea, and they ended up volunteering with that group and still were able to move forward doing the work they want to do, just sort of in a different form.
Yeah, and that's something we'll talk about later when we talk about alternatives to starting your own nonprofit. I mean, this is the first and maybe the best alternative is to partner with existing nonprofits and to add your program or your idea into the mix of what's already existing on the ground. Okay, so we talked about doing your sort of market survey, and that is one component of putting together a business plan. And I think that's the next kind of big topic or big idea we want to talk about is that nonprofits are businesses. They are legally incorporated as corporations, as business, as corporate entities. A lot of the same requirements legally and operationally apply to nonprofits. If you have employees, the same employment laws apply. So when you start a nonprofit, you also have to be ready to start a business. And anyone starting a business needs to put together a business plan. So I think that's something that we ask potential clients, Lauren, who come to us for help to start their nonprofit. We ask for a business plan first.
Definitely. That's one of the first things I ask a nonprofit about. And it's because it sort of makes or breaks you, really. The practice of sitting down and putting to paper the ideas that you probably have already thought through in your head is really what helps you think about what can be realistic, and you've done some of your research at that point. So certainly that should go into the business plan. Talk about what you found out, talk about the gap that you're filling that you learned exists and so forth. But sitting down and writing your business plan goes a little bit beyond the mission statement, which I think that, everybody's obsessed with. What is my mission statement?
Right.
And while it's important to have a good one that's concise, maybe just a few sentences, you need to expand on that when it comes to your business plan, because ultimately this plan is going to be your map. It's going to help you think through how your program is going to run day to day. It's going to help you think through how your program is going to evolve from year to year. So sitting down and just, I tell most folks, there are some samples out there, which we'll talk about a little later. But even if you just sit down and sort of make, a basic list of, the items that you've been thinking through, and then sort of start to organize it the way you maybe did when you were writing papers in school, it can help you think through the practicalities. If you're going to be offering a program that's teaching something, for example, give an overview of what the curriculum might look like.
Right.
What's the schedule of the program? Is this something you're offering once a year? Is this something you're offering once a month? Anybody who's going to read your business plan wants to be able to walk away and really understand or think that they understand what a day in the life of your nonprofit means, what they would get out of it. So as much information as you can put in there, the better. And it really will start to make you think, can I realistically run this program as many times as I want? Will I have staff, for example, to do that? And you'll start asking yourselves the questions you need to answer to make it a reality.
Yeah, and I think this takes some discipline too. You really have to sit down and do it, because it's possible to start a small nonprofit legally, with the IRS, without putting together an extremely detailed business plan, especially if you fill out the easy version of the nonprofit application, which is a kind of short form application. Then the IRS really just wants to know your mission statement and kind of wants a high level understanding what you're going to do, but you don't have to sit down and turn out a budget and turn out your financial model. But it doesn't matter whether you're required to or not. It's just something you should be doing to create a sustainable organization. So, we've already touched on some of the components of kind of most business plans. You should have your mission statement in there. You should have your market research in there and your needs assessment. You should have a detailed description of what your program is going to be. But some other pieces that we should definitely mention are your financial model and how you're going to be financially sustainable. And if part of that is that you're going to be funded through grants, you should actually have already gone out and looked at what grants are available, what that grant landscape looks like for you.
Yes, put together a projected budget. No one's going to hold you to it if you don't accomplish it, but it shows that you've realistically thought through where the funding can come from. And there's some great places you can go out there that can help you. DC government has the Office of Partnerships and Grant Services, and you can just walk in or maybe make an appointment, I should say. They have a computer center that has access to all sorts of grant giving databases out there, so you can look up different foundations based on the kind of work you do and get a sense of, who funds your work. And the staff there at that agency are actually very helpful too in sort of guiding you, grants that they know a little bit more about. And they even send a weekly list out of different, grant opportunities each week. So it's worthwhile to make that connection now, not only to think through where you might be funded, but because then you'll know who to call once you do become a 501c3 and you need to look for ongoing support that way too. And then I also recommend the Foundation Center, which is a great resource. They too have a library of different foundations across the country, and the librarians there can point you to foundations that might be best appropriate for you. And they have some great classes. If you've never written a grant proposal before, or maybe you have, but it's been some time, you can go to an in-person class or even do one of their webinars, and they'll walk through the basics for you. So it'll help you to think through where you might get your funding, but I think it also gives you a more realistic perspective of what's going to be involved with fundraising once you actually do become a nonprofit.
Yeah. And we've been talking about grants, but nonprofits are funded in a variety of different ways. If you plan on being funded through individual donations, you should then be describing kind of what your fundraising strategy is going to be, who you think your donors are going to be, how you're going to target them and market your fundraising towards them. A lot of nonprofits are funded through program service income, so they generate some of their own funding. For example, if you're a nonprofit feeder, you're allowed to charge tickets to your performances, and that money can go back to support the theater and to support the artistic program you have going on. If that's your funding model, then your business plan is going to actually look much more like a traditional business plan, because you're going to have to figure out how many tickets you're going to have to sell to keep the thing afloat. So, the business plan, I think it's an opportunity really to grapple with these issues earlier rather than later, and to flesh it out for yourself and for potential supporters. Aside from the financial piece of it, the other big piece I want to make sure we talk about is talking about the leadership and the staff and the personnel who are going to be involved in your nonprofit. So, we talked to a lot of individual founders, but a nonprofit is more than just, one person. It's at minimum a board. Every nonprofit needs to have a board of directors. And if you are going to have staff to run the program, you should start thinking about what those staff positions are going to have to look like, and the kind of people that you're going to have to need to recruit. That's another big piece of the puzzle as well.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon as a startup to have what we call a working board.
Yeah.
The people who've agreed to maybe be your initial board members might be the people who are helping to sort of fill in, positions that later on, once you've grown, might be paid positions. So there's no shame in that. And I often say that, as you're looking for board members, no matter what, you want somebody who maybe has a financial mind, maybe somebody who, has experience in the program itself, has worked in the program, someone who maybe has experience with fundraising. So they sort of lend themselves naturally to helping you as you're building the program when you may not have money to pay, an actual accountant to work for you, or you may not have money yet to pay a program director or something along those lines. But be careful in who you choose, even from the get-go. DC government requires 3 board members to start. And so, to incorporate, you'll need that. But definitely you want to make sure that you may have a little bit beyond that to cover your bases and cover the different subject matters and the skills that you need.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think so often we tell people that there's that 3-person requirement, and then they go, oh, okay, let me, I haven't thought of them yet, but I'll call, my friends and we'll get them together. That's the way that some people do it, but this is another opportunity to build up your initial team and to make sure you have all the right expertise on the table. Something Lauren and I were talking about is that, a lot of founders might be really good about telling their story, might have a lot of passion. They might be good at formulating kind of the big ideas. But what a lot of founders might lack is sort of the operational expertise, the financial accounting expertise, the legal expertise, fundraising and grant writing, all these skills that go into running a successful nonprofit they might not personally have. And that's something that you can develop by growing your board. And it's also an opportunity to get people excited about your startup. If you if you're having a hard time getting 3 or 4 or 5 initial board members jazzed about your project, then that's going to reflect challenges that you're going to have down the road. So, building an enthusiastic, strong core team is definitely something to do earlier rather than later. So that's why we talk about it as part of the business planning process. Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So if people are intimidated about writing their business plan, maybe we should talk about some resources out there that are available.
Yeah, definitely. You can easily, once again, Google nonprofit business plans. One website that we found that a lot of people like over the years is bplans.com. And again, just type in nonprofit. And they have like a good sampling of different business plans for nonprofits, everything from a soup kitchen to a youth program. So it's helpful to read through and get a sense of, how your nonprofit would fit into that sort of format. Mm-hmm. We're not saying you have to write it exactly that way, but it'll help you get started in how you're trying to organize your business plan. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, there are some resources out there, some non-legal resources, I should say, business counselors who can look over whatever you create as a first draft. Some of them are run by DC government agencies who want to help startups, and some of them are nonprofits themselves whose mission it is to help startups. So, for example, there's a group called SCORE DC, which I hear a lot of great feedback about. And then there's
SCORE is part of a national network.
Yes.
So they'll have offices in a lot of different states.
Yes, that's right. So actually, they have access to mentors across the country, and I think that there are situations where you can walk in person in DC, but certainly they have resources where you can connect with other experts in other jurisdictions through their network. And then another one is the DCRA Small Business Resource Center. If you've been reading up at all at this point about incorporating, you know that DCRA is the place in DC where you're going to have to go for that. And so their center is actually extremely useful, not only in navigating the DC government process when you get up to that step, but they also have business counselors on hand who are willing to sit with you one-on-one and look over anything you've created. And then there are 2 other ones I mentioned. Like I said, there are many, so feel free to do your research and find others. Washington, D.C. Women's Small Business Center is actually a really great one, too. You don't have to be a woman to go there, even though it's in the name. But they do focus a lot on women businesses and women groups. And then the other one is the Anacostia Economic Development Center as well. And keep in mind, many of these groups, their primary funding is to help for-profit small businesses, but they do still work with nonprofits. So it's actually worth, again, picking up your phone and calling them and telling them what you're doing and seeing if you can set an appointment to meet with someone one-on-one. But again, I recommend already put something on paper so that you have something that they can help you tweak. None of them are going to sit down with you and help you write it from scratch. It really is meant to be sort of the next step after you have done some work yourself, writing-wise. And most of the counseling is free. Some of these groups will also offer classes for business plan writing and other things related, so those might be a nominal fee involved for those, but more often than not, you can get some free help to meet one-on-one with an expert who has done a lot of business plan writing in their career.
Awesome. So, before we end, let's circle back and let's say that you've listened to this podcast and you've done your research and you're not sure if you're ready to start a nonprofit yet, or you've decided that there are a lot of great organizations doing similar work in the area, and at least for now, you don't want to start your own new nonprofit. What are some alternatives to starting a new 501c3? And we want to touch on 2 of those alternatives really briefly. One we've alluded to already, which is partnering with existing organizations and just trying to grow the idea that you have or the program idea that you have at those organizations. So, talking to the leaders of the organizations, volunteering with organizations, if you want to go even further down the line, researching grant and funding opportunities that you could bring to existing organizations and say, hey, look, maybe if we work together to get funding for this idea, we can do this here. So that's one way to do it. And then there's another legal vehicle available that we call fiscal sponsorship. And fiscal sponsorship is done in a variety of ways, but the most common way to do it is to find an existing 501c3 organization that agrees to sponsor a kind of startup project under their 501c3 status. So your project essentially becomes a project of the 501c3, They take the lead in fundraising, in accepting and processing donations. Usually they'll take those donations and segregate them into an account that's earmarked for your organization, although they're still going to exercise oversight and control over those funds. So fiscal sponsorship is a good alternative because it allows you to sort of pilot a program if you're in a really early stage. You can run it at a smaller scale without having to create your own separate legal entity, see if it works, see what the kinks are, see what the financial needs of your organization are, without having to go through the whole process of incorporating a new organization. Fiscal sponsorships are controlled by contract. So if you do decide to go down this path, you do need to make sure that you have a good fiscal sponsorship agreement between your project and the existing 501c3 so that everyone's on the same page and everyone understands what their responsibilities and their legal obligations are. We have a webinar about fiscal sponsorship on lawhelp.org /DC/CED, which is our resource website for all of our nonprofit and small business resources. So you should look for it there.
Yeah, and I just want to add one more thing to fiscal sponsorships. It doesn't mean that you've completely closed the door and becoming a 501c3. It may be that for now you want to do a test run, but then, after you've had some experience running your program and you feel it's successful, that you are ready to put together a 501c3 organization. So, you can have a fiscal sponsor for a little while and then choose to be a 501c3 later on as well.
Yeah. So some people can think of it as an intermediary step. Some people just start a fiscally sponsored project with the intention of it just being that, but a lot of people start it as a first step to starting an organization or an initiative of some kind. Great. Well, that's awesome. Thanks, Lauren, for joining us.
Yeah, and if we have time, I just thought we'd mention a few of the resources. You already mentioned lawhelp.org/DC/CED, but I wanted to point you guys on that website to the section called Starting a Nonprofit in DC. Pretty self-explanatory title, but there's some great resources in that section. In particular, there's a guide that our program has put together that walks you through all the steps of becoming a new nonprofit. And it includes things like going to DCRA and making sure you're incorporated and you have your proper licenses and all the steps that then would lead up to becoming a 501c3, getting that determination from the IRS. So there's some free on-demand webinars there. There's some short legal alerts. And in that guide itself, there are actually sample articles of incorporation and bylaws, which are also useful as you're starting to put together your board and think through some of those issues. And then separately, there's another section which sometimes I think is as useful. It's called Serving on the Board of Directors. So as you're thinking through who should be on your board and you're talking to people who are interested, it's helpful to know to tell them what their responsibilities are really going to be. And this section has a few manuals. One in particular is a sample board manual that kind of outlines the fiduciary responsibilities that board members take on. They become a board member and talks through some of just, the yearly work that they do, tasks that they need to make sure they're doing on a regular basis. So again, that section has some other on-demand webinars, other little short bits. We have, I think, board basics webinars, which cover some bite-sized issues to make it a little easier and unpack. So I suggest you taking a peek at those too as you're doing your other research and your business plan writing. It definitely can help supplement that.
Yeah, I'm really happy you brought those resources up because today we've been talking about sort of high-level early-stage strategic considerations and business planning and needs assessment. But what those resources are going to describe are sort of the more logistical legal requirements for incorporating your organization and then for having board governance and for running your board. So, after you form your organization, there's a lot of requirements and a lot of considerations that are ongoing. So that's also something people should have in mind when they decide to start a nonprofit is, do I have the desire and the energy and the expertise to keep this organization running in a way that's legally compliant? So those resources will help you do that.
Yeah, and speaking of, that legal work, once you put together your business plan, you've established your board, you might qualify for some assistance from our program here at the DC Bar Pro Bono Center. And we have an application process. We would want to see those items you've created, your board list, your business plan. And what you can do is you can go to our website to take a peek at that application. It's at www.dcbar.org/nonprofit. And so that means that you've done all this legwork we've been talking about during this webinar, and now you've made all your business decisions, and you're at the point where it's time to maybe be able to talk to an attorney. So by submitting that application, we'll be able to look over everything you've done and then determine if maybe we can find a law firm or some other pro bono counsel to help you through the application process for your 501c3.
Yeah, and these are organizations that are serving DC residents.
Right. In particular, we only do ongoing representation for nonprofits that are serving the DC community. I mean, that being said, we have other legal resources we can often point you to if for some reason you're not eligible for our matches program.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Lauren. All right, and thank you for listening. We'll see you next month. Bye.